When I first saw USC Counterforce, XCOM and StarCraft came to mind. Though those are similar games, they're different in that one is turn-based whereas the other is an RTS. Still, it was easy for me to make those connections because of how USCC presents itself. It's pretty much if StarCraft only involved the Terran and the Zerg. Being a fan of both of those acclaimed series of games, I wanted to give USCC a try. As has occurred a handful of times, I realized that USCC is in early access, but that was after having claimed the key I was provided. I don't think a game being in early access automatically makes it bad, but at the same time, there are too many stories out there of games that have been in early access for years or that drastically change while being in early access. I normally try to avoid early access games for those two reasons, but also because I want to be able to review a product that's either fully complete or is a complete version of what's to come, much like with a demo. Seeing as how I accepted the key and was interested in what it had to offer, I gave USCC a try. From the start, I thought that it took way too long for USC to get started. I regularly say that the more options a game has, the better off it'll be, but USCC has shown me that's not always true. I don't think it's a bad thing to offer a high level of customization, especially since this is a strategy game, but this is one on steroids. I'm sure that there are games out there that are even more complex and fully allow you to customize the most minute details of it, but I wasn't expecting this from USCC. I wanted to get right into playing, but instead, I spent around 30 minutes or so trying to get the game and my squad set up. On the topic of squads, I found it hard to get something good going fast and efficiently. Much like what I was just discussing, you were in control and had to decide how to arm your squad. You were pretty much handed a blank canvas and expected to make something of it. I tried to go for a balanced squad that offered a little bit of everything, but it also didn't help that USCC kept letting me know that my squad was missing essential parts. At that point, I would have liked to have just had whichever options were present to have been automatically taken care of, but I didn't see that that was an option. Instead, I decided to roll the dice and go with what felt right to me. As I started playing, I thought that it was kind of like XCOM, but not as intuitive. A lot of thinking was involved, and more often than not, I was throwing things at the wall to see what would stick. The first level I played was one that was fully set up. I liked that, but I quickly realized how badly the odds were stacked against me. I had a squad of 6 soldiers and I thought that I was equipped to deal with whatever I'd encounter, but I was wrong. I managed to take out a decent number of enemies, but at the same time, I ended up learning that some would explode as a result of being taken out. The result of that was 2 of my soldiers being killed. In XCOM, I would have just loaded up an earlier save point, but I didn't feel the need to do that in USCC. The option to do that is there, but I guess you could say that I wasn't as invested in USCC as I was while playing the recent XCOM games. During that initial playthrough, I tried to make do with what I had, but before long, all of my soldiers were dead. That left me laughing because I knew that I was in for a rough ride. After having tried that generated level, I decided to give defense mode a try. Much like in the beginning of USCC, I quickly saw that there were a lot of settings to work with. The building mode was nice, mainly because of the level of customization it has to offer, but I was also overwhelmed by what to build. Initially, I stuck to trying to build a simple base that was protected by gun turrets. That seemed like a good idea, but I eventually realized that the turrets didn't work in the manner I expected them to. I figured they'd work automatically or offer more freedom when it came to their usage, but I was wrong. I really shouldn't have been surprised, seeing as how USCC is the way that it is, but at the same time, I felt that the odds were stacked against me in the wrong kind of way. I could understand things being this way at a higher difficulty level, but even on standard it felt like I was playing against the game rather than with it, and that left me feeling that USCC in its current state is imbalanced. On standard, the enemies were bullet sponges. During defense mode, that wasn't as noticeable, but it was especially bad during the pre-made missions. It could just be due to the difference between the styles of levels that were used in each separate game mode, but I felt that parts of USCC were harder than they needed to be. Going back to what I was discussing about USCC's defense mode, I did see more than one positive from playing it. Besides feeling that the difficulty was better balanced and easier to work with, I appreciated the fact that you could get your money back after removing weapons and other things that you'd build at an earlier time. It's because other similar games would have just had you eat the cost, or you'd have to stick to what you had. It's not as if I was completely remodeling my base and second-guessing everything, but I appreciated being able to sell a turret because I realized that it'd be better off facing another direction. Despite feeling that USCC isn't as enjoyable as I thought it'd be, I do have to acknowledge that it's very strategic. Even something as simple as having your soldiers crouch came into play, and that was effective. Thanks to USCC featuring battle cams, which reminded me of Aliens, I could see when a soldier was standing over an enemy instead of being directly at their level. I'm not sure how much of a difference it made, but it made sense to me that being at the same level of your enemy would lead to a greater chance of landing an attack with greater accuracy. The more I played USCC, the more I realized that I couldn't play it as if it were just another turn-based strategy game. That's the mentality that I had when I first started playing, but I quickly realized that I had to switch things up in order to have a chance to succeed. What I'm getting at is that despite wanting each soldier to fit into a class system, I eventually realized that each one had to have a bit of everything in order to stand a chance. It's because I initially decided to use one of my soldiers as the squad's designated medic. I eventually realized that I was better off having each of my soldiers with at least one kind of healing item, which there are plenty of. One soldier working as a medic was too much when I'd constantly have them running around trying to heal teammates while also avoiding damage and occasionally attacking enemies. It's possible that my way of playing went against how the devs of USCC meant for it to be played, but things eventually worked out for me, even if only to an extent. In general, in these kinds of games there's usually one thing or another that works best. From what I've experienced over the years, the point is to make it so that each class/soldier is able to contribute to the overall well-being of the squad, but that wasn't entirely the case in USCC. I quickly realized that snipers were very effective. Not only could they damage enemies from afar, they were also accurate, and I'm pretty sure that you could use them slightly more than soldiers with other weapons. It's not surprising at all, but USCC's weapons feature a secondary attack. For example, with the minigun you could use a scattershot or a more precise kind of gunfire. With the assault rifles you could use short burst or full auto. Each attack had its pros and cons. I didn't have a preference over one or the other, seeing as how I was trying to inflict as much damage as I could. Besides offering more variety to USCC's combat, secondary attacks were also useful to avoid friendly fire. Unfortunately, friendly fire is possible in USCC. You could say that just adds to the strategic nature of the game, but that was just one more hassle to deal with while playing. In USCC, it wasn't all difficult to deal with. There was one way of managing your squad that stood out to me, and that was due to easily showcasing how many APs each of your soldiers had left. I could easily click on that, see which soldiers could still be used, and based on that, I could decide how to move forward. Most of the time I could just change my soldiers' positioning, but other times it contributed to me knowing which soldier had enough AP left to attack or do something more besides change position. It's easy to understand why USCC works with an AP system, but at times it was frustrating to deal with. It's because USCC also makes use of a morale system. You could use healing items to recover HP and prevent low morale from affecting your soldiers, but I thought that this wasn't as fully developed as it could have been. On that note, it's worth saying that it's hard to analyze an early access game because it's possible that something I have an issue with could be changed at a later time. Still, morale being too low to increase a soldier's morale with an item meant to do that seemed like too much for me. I could accept being unable to attack or change my positioning when morale was too low, seeing as how that directly contributes to what's meant to be done during a normal state, but I thought it was too much to not be able to improve a soldier's morale when they had the right item to do so. That may come off as a nitpick, but it's worth bringing up because that created issues for me more than once. Having previously mentioned USCC's defense mode, it's worth discussing it even more. At first, this mode seemed like it'd be faster paced. It's because its description gave me the idea that it'd be more like a horde mode, but it wasn't. Defense mode took longer to set up, seeing as how it involved you having to build up a base and its defenses. Having to deal with more moments of setting things up was frustrating, but I ended up enjoying defense mode more than the pre-made levels/missions that I initially tried. It might be because defense mode came off as easier, but I liked not feeling as if the odds were unfairly stacked against me. I still ended up losing pretty much all of my squad, but it felt fairer. I'd eventually realized that USCC's defense mode reminded me of MMA fighters that are too tough for their own good. For a specific example, I'll bring up Stipe Miocic versus Mark Hunt. This is probably a strange comparison to make, but it'll eventually make sense. Defense mode was longer than the pre-made levels/missions I initially tried out. As a result of that, I took more of a whooping for a greater period of time. I was also able to dish out punishment against the enemy and take out more of them than I expected to, but I took as much of a beating, if not more. Having played just under 4 hours of USC Counterforce, I feel that I saw a decent chunk of what it currently has to offer. I wish it'd be more like XCOM or StarCraft, but I can also imagine some saying, isn't it better to play something that can eventually stand out as its own thing instead of playing a ripoff? While I do think that's true, USCC could offer a better experience if it did more of what felt right/worked with XCOM and StarCraft. There's enough in this early access of the game to enjoy, but seeing as how I felt that the odds were stacked against me in just about every way possible, I don't think that it's worth buying in its current state. Some might enjoy the challenge, especially if they're a specific kind of patient gamer that likes having a lot to choose from, but this game just isn't for me. I think general gamers would be turned off from USCC and what it currently has to offer. If you're more patient than I am and are looking for a more hardcore turn-based strategy game, feel free to give USC Counterforce a try. It's currently worth $19.99, and to me that's more than I'd be willing to pay in its current state, but if anything I've been discussing stands out, feel free to give it a try. Do you think it's okay for normal/standard modes to offer higher than expected difficulty? Is it possible for a game to have too many options/customizations? If you enjoyed this content, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much for watching.